My name is Alyssa, and this is Listen to Liss. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of Listen to Liss. Today, let's talk auditions. Specifically, let's talk monologues. Last week, we talked about what's in my audition binder. We did a full deep dive of all the songs I have in my audition binder, the things I bring with me, how I make my audition binder, all that good stuff. Definitely check that out if you're looking to update your binder or just get a peek inside mine. In that video, I mentioned that you should always have a monologue. I thought today would be a perfect time to talk about audition monologues. In today's video, we will learn how to pick a monologue, where to find a monologue, what makes a good monologue, and then I have some tips for monologue success in different genres. Just a few little things I've picked up along the way. Without any further ado, let's get started. I'm sure if you're an actor or a performer, at some point in your life, you've heard the phrase back pocket monologue. You need a back pocket monologue. Everybody should have a back pocket monologue. What is a back pocket monologue? Basically, a back pocket monologue is a monologue that you know, inside and out, front to back. You could do it rain or shine at any given moment. You could perform this monologue on the spot. The reason that we have a back pocket monologue is for auditions or callbacks. Anytime you're presenting material in front of casting or directors or that sort of situation, you may bring a monologue to perform that they've asked you to prepare. And when you get into the room, they may say, "What else do you have for us?" You don't ever want to be in the situation where you are like, nothing, because then they're definitely going to move on and say, "Well, thanks so much," and send you on your way, and then you're probably not going to get that job or that role or what have you. So having a monologue that you can perform at any moment gives you something to do when people say, "What else do you have?" "Oh, well, I have this monologue," which means you should practice it often. Okay, Alyssa, I need a back pocket monologue. Where do I find a monologue? Okay, great question. I'm going to tell you right now. There are a few places you can find monologues. You can find monologues online by simply Googling best female dramatic monologues, and a bajillion links will come up, okay? These monologues are fine, okay? They're fine. You know, we all love the Divorce Papers monologue. We've all eaten the Divorce Papers with ketchup, okay? Because we've all had an unserious relationship, so we simply can't have a serious divorce, okay? I get that. However, we've all seen those monologues, which means casting and directors and professors, they've also seen those monologues hundreds of times, okay? Pick something new. Now, that's not to say that you need to go find something that's like crazy niche, but, you know, we don't all need to do the Divorce Papers monologue. You can also find monologues in monologue books. Something like this. This is Exceptional Monologues 2 for men and women. What this is somebody, Samuel French, has gone through different plays and pulled monologues from them. This is what it looks like. You can see that over here we have the name of the play, the playwright, a play synopsis, and then we have the character, their age, and the genre of the monologue, which is helpful. And then they give us a synopsis of the scene, which is very nice to kind of give you some external context for what's being said here, and then obviously the monologue itself. Now every page is like that, and you can see that I've gone through and I've marked the ones that I liked or that were applicable to whatever I was looking for at the time that I marked these. You know, this is not a bad way to go about it. These are from published plays, so a monologue book is an option for you. The best way to find a monologue is to read plays. I'm serious, because what you can find on your own reading plays, you'll find something that you really connect with. What I do, this is part of my script library. So I have all these plays, and when I'm looking for a new monologue, what I do is I literally, if I don't have time to sit and read, 20 plays, I'll take the play and open it up and flip through it. I'm skimming. Now, I've read this before. Actually, this was my one-act play in high school, so I'm well versed with this show. there's this long chunk of text, the character Hattie. And so I would read the scene, I'd read the monologue, and see if it kind of fits what I'm looking for, or even parts of it do, because you can cut the monologue. You don't have to do it exactly as is. That's important. What will make it easier for you is doing little bits at a time. So reading a play a week, and if you find a monologue in there, mark it and point it out. That way, when it's time to find a monologue, you're not trying to read 20 plays at once looking for a good new monologue. You have, a nice selection of things that you can already go back and look at because you know that you like them, at least a little bit, because you marked them. Something to think about. Okay, Alyssa, I've found lots of monologues. Now, which one do I pick? Great questions, everybody. Let's talk about it. Pick something that you really enjoy doing, because this back pocket monologue is going to be with you for a long time. I have a few back pocket monologues, different genres. The back pocket Shakespeare monologue I've been doing since my freshman year of high school. That was 2017. That was 9 years ago. And I'm still doing that same monologue. Imagine if I really didn't like that monologue very much, or just thought it was, okay. When you feel meh about a monologue, we're going to feel meh about your performance of the monologue. No matter what you do, no matter how much you put character into it or you really act, your core, that energy that you're feeling is going to radiate past all of the hard work that you're doing. Make sure you pick something that you enjoy, because if you enjoy it, they will already enjoy it that much more. Solely because your energy of performing it, casting can see that. Casting can see when you feel passionate about what you're doing, and you can't feel passionate about a monologue that you feel meh about. Also, pick something that is versatile. The dramatic monologue that I use, it applies to lots of situations, and that helps you a lot, because then you can just have one dramatic monologue that I can use for any situation. I've used it for tons of auditions that have nothing to do with each other, but I didn't have to rememorize a new monologue every time I went to that audition. Another piece of advice I have is to pick something that suits you well. I'm not saying that can't stretch your bounds a little bit. That is great. But if you're 15 and you're performing a monologue about a mother of 5 who's on her second divorce, I'm not going to believe that. You don't want to create a distraction because casting is sitting there going, I don't believe that you're a mother of 3 on your second divorce because you're 15. So you want to pick something that's going to suit you well. What makes a good monologue? How do I know that the monologue I've picked is good and versatile? First thing you should look for is that the monologue is talking to someone. Your audition becomes instantly more clear and focused when you have a clear idea of who you're talking to. And if it can be outlined in your monologue, because then you're not having to do so much work to establish that relationship and establish that connection, because the monologue is helping do it for you right off the bat. Especially if they name a character right in the beginning, if it's a very clear, like, no, you listen, Greg. It's immediately clear you're talking to Greg. That over there, that is Greg. This is preference. I don't think you should be picking monologues that are phone conversations, unless you can easily make the transition to it not being on the phone, because you don't need to be bringing a prop into the audition room, and you don't need to pull out your phone to pretend to talk in an audition. It's distracting. It's just not my preference. If you think otherwise, you do your thing, boo. Let's find an example, shall we? We're going to look at Harvey by Mary Chase. If you haven't read this, this is my play recommendation for you this week. You should read Harvey. It's a great comedic play. I really love it. Here is a great example. On page 32 of Harvey, we have this at the bottom where Dr. Chumley says, Doctor, the function of a psychiatrist is to tell the difference between those who are reasonable and those who merely talk and act reasonably. And this leads him into a long monologue. The point I want you to notice from that is that the monologue starts with doctor. Immediately, we establish who he's talking to and the status of the person he's talking to. We know that the person he's talking to is a doctor. It's very clear, it's direct, it immediately establishes your connection with your imaginary scene partner. That is the making of a good monologue. It sets you up for success. And like I said in my last video, we are always looking to set ourselves up for success in auditions. Another thing that makes a good monologue is a clear arc. Whether that's character arc or story arc, preferably both, where we start somewhere and we end in a different place. Because what that does, number one, it creates an interesting performance. It also showcases your abilities as an actor. How can you transition this character from one thought to another? We have to go somewhere. Otherwise, the monologue stays stagnant and it's bland and we're bored, quite frankly. Choosing a monologue that has a good foundation will just create a stronger performance for you. This is an example of a monologue with an arc. Okay, this is from Amazing Grace. This is page 29. Selena, it's written into the stage directions at the beginning. At the beginning, it says, full of energy and hope. And she starts, I'd like to pass through it with a big bucket of paint and whitewash every ceiling, wall, and floor, and nook and cranny. And she goes on. And then at the end, she says, and bright and full of light. In the stage directions, it says, and then she breaks down. Oh, Vivian, I can't do this. I can't do any of this. It's already written into the script that there is a change here. Now, I'm not saying that you have to do it exactly like that. You don't have to read the stage directions at all, but there is an arc here. The character goes from full of energy and hope to, and then she breaks down. It's written into the writing that that arc will take place. It's just helping you on your way. So I have tips for the specific genres when you're picking monologue. First, for dramatic monologues. This kind of plays into what I said about choosing something that fits you well, especially if you're auditioning for collegiate theaters, if you're auditioning for BFA programs. You're probably what, 18, 17? We don't want to see you do a monologue about your dead child. I'm sorry. The performance that you're doing is an impression that you're making. So obviously you're not saying those words, but you are saying those words. When you come into the room and you choose to do a monologue that's a really heavy topic. So when you come in and you bring this really heavy topic into the room and then you leave, casting and directors, they just kind of sit in that. It just sits in the room and then everybody's like, And you don't want the energy in the room when you leave to be, Because then when they think about you, they're going to think about that monologue that you did. And then they're going to go, All that to say, no dead baby monologues. Just skip them. Pardon my bluntness. My tips for comedic monologues. When you're picking a comedic monologue, lots of comedic monologues are storytelling monologues. So what do I mean by that? I have a comedic monologue that I do that's a waiter telling a story about patrons at a restaurant. It starts off with, so I'm a waiter, right? It's literally the character telling a story. The pitfall with those kinds of monologues is that they tend to become you reciting a story. To combat this, remember that you're still a character. Finding ways that you can bring the character into the piece will help you a lot with monologues like that. And what I mean by that is maybe the character is getting pushed into telling this story again. So the whole time that they're telling the story, they're kind of like, so I'm a waiter, right? Or maybe the person telling the story is like super excited to tell you because they think it's the funniest story ever. So they're like, so I'm a waiter, right? Maybe they are with a new group of people. You know, everybody's kind of sharing some horror stories and they're like, okay, so I'm a waiter, right? Immediately that has more dynamic than just, so I'm a waiter, right? And this kind of, I'm telling you a story because the monologue is a story. Remember that behind that there is character, and the character has an opinion on the story that they're telling, and you get to make all that up. You get to create that world. My biggest tip for picking a Shakespeare monologue is to not stress about it too much, quite frankly. In the theater world, there tends to be a lot of stress about finding a monologue that's, unique, or that's not overdone, that nobody's seen before. There's only so many Shakespeare monologues. He only wrote so many. Any monologue that you pick, any sonnet, any play, they've seen it. Especially if you're auditioning for any regional Shakespeare company, they're going to have seen every Shakespeare monologue you could possibly think of. Even the one that you think nobody knows, this really niche monologue from Sonnet 45. It's like, yeah, we know Sonnet 45. We're a Shakespeare company. Don't stress too much about picking a super niche monologue. Just pick one that you like. I've literally been using the same Shakespeare monologue for 9 years. I love that monologue. That's the only reason that I'm still doing it 9 years later. And now I know it so well, it is second nature. So when I go into the audition room, all I'm doing is messing around because I have no doubt in my mind that I have that monologue memorized, that I know it every single which way. Okay, so for Shakespeare, don't stress too much about it. Just pick one that you like. Once you've picked a monologue, remember that you can cut the monologue to suit whatever you're doing. The Shakespeare monologue that I do is very long, and I have multiple versions of it that I've cut. I have a 45-second cut, I have a minute cut, I have a minute and a half. There are all sorts of ways that you can cut monologues and rearrange them slightly to make them work for you. The Amazing Grace monologue that we looked at earlier is a good example of this. She's talking to Vivian, but we don't learn that until the very last line when she says, "Oh, Vivian, I can't do this. I can't do any of this." If I wanted to make this monologue a little bit stronger for an audition, I would move the line, "Oh, Vivian," to the beginning of the monologue. Okay, so I'm not adding anything to the monologue. I'm moving something that's already there to the beginning to read it instead of, "I'd like to pass through it with a big bucket of paint." I would change it to, "Oh, Vivian, I would like to pass through it with a big bucket of paint." All it does is make it a little more clear who I'm talking to. Or if you find a scene where one person speaks a lot and one person has filler lines or small questioning moments, you can cut those out and make that into one full monologue. You're allowed to cut parts of the script out to make the monologue fit. If there's a middle chunk of the monologue that makes no sense and doesn't help your arc, cut it. Get rid of it. Cut the monologue to make it fit you. That's what I have to say. For example, this is from Winter Break by Joe Calarco. On page 57, there's a small monologue at the end. After this dialogue with Jess and Frankie, Jess says, "Thank you." And Frankie says, "For?" And Jess says, "For just living in the truth that she died." If I wanted to use this monologue, but I wanted the thank you in it, I would just cut Frankie's line. "Thank you for just living in the truth that she died." And it makes just as much sense as when we have Frankie say, "For?" Actually, there's more of the monologue above it. I might do all of that as a monologue and cut Frankie out of it entirely. You're allowed to do that. I give you permission. Go ahead. You've picked your monologue. You've cut it. You love it. It's great. How do we get it in your back pocket? Well, first, memorize it. Memorize neutrally. What does that mean, Alyssa? What do you mean memorize neutrally? Well, let me show you. When you memorize a monologue, you don't want to memorize in inflection. Because if you memorize in inflection, every time you say it, you're going to use that inflection. I have monologues like this. I have monologues that I have to work really hard to not perform in an inflection that I've memorized them. So if I were to be memorizing this monologue from The Con by Tracy Wells, I would start in the most monotone voice possible. "Times have changed, Joe. Huge media companies bought up the licensing for these characters and are churning out shows, movies, and merchandise for public consumption. People don't need to turn to their favorite comic books to find out what Spider-Man is up to." The most monotone, basic, boring speech ever. Why do we do this? Because if I memorize the monologue like this, "Times have changed, Joe. Huge media companies bought up the licensing for these characters and are churning out shows, movies, and merchandise for public consumption." Then, in a few weeks when I go into an audition and they say, "Hey, do you know anything?" And I say, "You know what? I have a monologue from The Con by Tracy Wells." I am going to say, "Times have changed, Joe. Huge media companies bought up the licensing for these characters and are pumping out shows, movies, and merchandise." My muscle memory is going to repeat it the way I've memorized it. You perform the way you practice. Learning it and memorizing it blank slate will give you the opportunity to play with it more when you're using it for auditions and performances. Once you've memorized it, rehearse it often, practice often. It's the same thing we talked about with music that's in your audition book. You should know it. When you're in the audition room and you're nervous and there's a million things going through your head, when they say to you, "Do you have anything else for us?" you can say, "Yes." And you can perform your monologue And you don't have to stress about whether or not you really know it. All you have to think about is getting into the character and doing a performance that you enjoy. The way that I do this is I'll just quiz myself randomly. I'll be on my way to work and I'll think, let me say that monologue. And I'll say it and see how much of it I know. And I'll think about the parts where I maybe miss. And I might go back and look at them later and really smooth out those parts in my memorization. And then I'll practice it in different ways. The other day I was walking home from the train station and I was doing my monologue in a British accent, making up circumstances for the monologue, because it's good to continue practicing these monologues because they need to stay fresh and they need to stay sharp. All right, everybody. It has been such a joy talking to you about monologues. Let's go over some lesson takeaways. Today we learned where to pick a monologue: online, monologue books, reading plays. Reading plays is the best one. How to pick a monologue: remember something you like, something that's versatile, and something that suits you well. We learned what makes a good audition monologue, what things that we're looking for. We learned some tips about dramatic, comedic, and Shakespeare monologues. And we talked a little bit about memorizing your monologue. I hope that you learned something today. I hope you had a good time tuning in, and I will see you next week.